Welcome to the Stockout. This is your show at FreightWaves TV for all things related to the CPG and retail industries. I'm one of your hosts, Mike Baudendistel, joined by Grace Sharkey. Grace, you're back from Texas.
Yeah, I'm like right back from where you're not the woods. It was a good time. We'll say a little stormy, definitely warm. Went to a Rangers game, which, an indoor baseball game is so strange to me. So
Mhm.
that threw me off a little bit, but it was a really cool stadium to go into.
Yeah, and that stadium is so new and nice. It's almost too comfortable. It's so comfortable. I
Yeah,
don't feel like I'm actually at a professional sporting event. Like I'm used to grew up going to Wrigley Field, and it was just
yeah.
so old and rickety that it's like, being cramped and, all these sort of annoyances are just part of the experience.
A thousand, like, to hit a home run and not see it like go into the sky and like clear, like you said, Wrigley Field, or like go into some of those like makeup stands around Wrigley, right at the different apartment. Like that's strange to me to see a home run that feels like infield just pop up. So yeah, it was that was cool. They also had fireworks go off in that stadium too. That should give the audience a good idea of how tall and how large it is. But yeah, I kind of wish we were able to go into the stadium next door. It's a little bit more old school looking.
Yeah, exactly. And then next door to that, they have the Cowboys Stadium, which boasts, I think, the 9th or 11th largest television in the world. They're very proud of
Oh,
that size of that television. Um, so what do we have to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about some of the FreightWaves articles that are up on the site. Zach always does a good job of getting an article up on Saturday. Zach Strickland, our head of market intelligence. We'll talk a little bit about, let's see, what's happening in Road Check Week, which we actually saw that move the needle in terms of some of our freight metrics that we watch, and then a little bit about tariffs, which is it seems like it could be a significant risk for some of the retailers. With both parties, interested in tariffs. Maybe one thing both sides can agree on, although it doesn't seem like the National Retail Federation agrees on it. And then talk about some of the extreme weather, which is impacting CPG and retail industries. This seems to be getting more and more of a problem. I didn't really appreciate it. If it wasn't for writing the Stockout and doing the Stockout content, I would not appreciate how much volatility that weather conditions cause. And we talked a little bit about Walmart, which reported earnings last week, and it's at kind of a new all-time high in terms of stock price. So it seems to be doing well there. But first, I want to talk about Zach Strickland's article over the weekend, and this is one I wanted to get your perspective on too. So Zach Strickland, head of market intelligence, writes an article every most Saturdays. This is something to get in the habit of reading over the weekend. When he puts these out, always very thoughtful. He calls it the chart of the week, and this week's chart of the week article pertains to the disparity between spot and contract rates. And this is really kind of right up our alley with the Stockout. So we think about the Stockout as sort of what would shippers care about in terms of news, in terms of looking at the market. And so what Zach shows here is that the contract rates have been unusually high relative to the spot rates for an extended period. And so we see the contract rates in the white line there. We see spot rates in the green line there. They've been about 30% higher lately, this versus about 12% in 2019. So this could ultimately be a shipper for a couple of reasons. So the fact that the spot rates are so far below the contract rates implies that there's continued deflationary pressure in the contract rates. A lot of shippers won't be able to help themselves. They'll take the prices, the rates down to the greatest extent they can. And so when the market eventually turns, the contract rates won't mean anything. That they just won't be honored. There won't be the same degree of compliance that they were looking for. You'd see the tender rejections pop up, and then shippers also, because the spot rates are so low, tempted to use spot rates, the spot market, as a way to use capacity rather than the contract markets, which sort of takes them out of the loop, maybe makes them not a preferred shipper to their carrier partners that they want to have around in the contract market. So that further leads to risk of service failures. But I wanted to get your perspective on all those things, given your background in the brokerage industry. So how would you be advising a shipper to position themselves in light of those data points?
Well, I think in particular too, it's interesting for shippers to take a second and look at their overall capacity network, analyze as much data they can from it as well. It's nice, of course, we have more of an overall idea of what's happening with different markets. But I mean, to go back to brokerage days, there's some customers who I could tell had placed themselves in back home markets because they wanted to live off the spot market, and that was a choice they made. And they also, of course, analyzed or produced their supply chain around it, so they never had to worry about things being late, or could take advantage of maybe the poor offerings that some of the spot carriers could bring with it. So of course, you want to have kind of that analytical look into exactly how you've built your carrier network around how you operate your shipping and receiving processes as well. Of course, figure out, I think, especially what we're seeing already and getting ready for what Q4 could look like. Analyze and figure out what demand's going to be like for the rest of the year for your industry, right? If you're seeing a little bit more construction and a little bit more of like raw materials, things of that nature, then the summertime going into the fall is going to be your prime. So it's going to be much different than the retailers that we talk about more on this show, the CPG companies that are going to have those holiday season deadlines to hit as well. All of that can play a big difference in the movement that you see. I get really excited kind of seeing these issues that we're pointing out here, especially this bad situation that you could put yourself in, keeping rates down and not really understanding how the carrier market is responding as a whole. I just wrote about this, I think last week, on Thursday. Good Ship, someone like Good Ship, having technology like that's going to be able to easily pinpoint out to you the risk that you have within your carrier networks. Because once again, for the companies I think that we talk about in this industry, there's going to be some lanes that aren't even going to be affected at all, and there's going to be some that are going to be really hurt, dependent on what your strategy is and how you've been discussing demand for those lanes with particular carriers. So I get really excited because I think where we might see, I don't want to say normalcy, but better projections and planning from shippers, and knowing that they have this tech that can quickly point out like where they need to start making those calls and start building better care relationships with, and maybe even so start building better rates with, in order to avoid a lot of that risk as well. One other small thing too, and I hope that I think shippers of what we talk about on this show understand this. Could understand maybe better. We've seen Walmart change stuff like this around, but really be aware as shippers your facility restrictions, whether that's certain trailers you can load or unload. Can you load from the side? Can you take a step deck and a flatbed? What are your loading hours? The small things right there can open up capacity for you like you've never seen. If you're just closing up shop at noon, you'd be surprised on what you could possibly grow your capacity staying open till 5 if you run into some of these issues that we're concerned with later on in the year. And even appointment times. The cool thing about these systems like Good Ship is yes, shippers are going to have a better understanding of their supply chain or their carrier networks. But on the opposite end, you're also going to have a really great understanding of how maybe well managed some of your facilities are. So again, you might see 80% of your facilities perform fine, but those 20% that have really bad reputations with carriers, when that market does flip a little bit more towards them and your rates are as low as they've been pushed and you haven't built that capacity up in those areas, you're going to feel the pain as well.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. Certainly there's more to it than just the rate the shipper is paying, which those facility situations. But it's a lot about rate, but not 100% about rate. So good thing to keep in mind there. But speaking of freight rates, they picked up a little bit last week during the road check week. Actually, more than a little bit. The spot rates picked up about 7%. So he's looking at the FreightWaves NTI in white. So you see that spike. last week, and then the tender rejection rate is the one in yellow. You saw that increase as well, not as dramatically as the rates did, but the spot rates, they went from about high 150s to $1.69. I guess presumably those will come down in the coming days. And so I wanted to ask about your experience during Road Check Week. I mean, to me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to sort of broadcast that you're going to check everyone, and so it seems like the worst carriers would then be the ones to stay home, the ones that actually need to be checked.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, but in sports they have drug testing. They don't usually tell them ahead of time when the drug testing is going to be.
Yeah.
So explain to me why that makes sense to publish when you're going to do all this, and what's your experience in Road Check Week in the brokerage industry?
Yeah, it is strange because I've even seen like statewide blitzes before. Like we had one on 69, I believe, going to Detroit, and the same thing there. They publish it like 2 weeks ahead of time, and so I don't know how you're going to catch people speeding if you're letting them know you're looking for them speeding at that time. I think for this one in particular, especially this international, you look at 3 different countries we're covering. I guarantee it's probably planned. I don't know why it's announced so early. I would even like to see maybe like, hey, next 24 hours we're going to start this thing. But I assume that it has to do with a lot of the planning behind it, getting people ready on the roads, having enough people to pull over. I think it's like one truck every 15 seconds or minutes, something like that, something crazy. So I assume it's the announcements there to get ready for it. In the brokerage experience, I have felt it before, but you did point out the biggest thing, which is the good carriers stay on the road. The bad ones, the bad habits that like to take back roads, like to avoid some of the police, you could say, throughout a regular run, are for sure going to stay home during these times. I've also seen, because it does tend to hit a week or so before Labor Day, a lot of people kind of take this as an extended holiday, take the days off, go spend the holiday with their family for a couple of weeks, and then get back into it starting in June. And dependent on what the volume they've been moving, I could see people maybe taking that time as well. And again, yeah, for me, it's just usually, I think that drop that we see and that impact in the market is coming from bad actors staying off the roads. I mean, we talked about just previously where we think the carrier market's going and the issues we're having there. So I think those that especially need to keep their business running are finding ways to do that, and at least taking safe lanes that they know they are going to be fine, and maybe not having issues on. I wouldn't be surprised too if we saw more carriers staying closer to home during this time so that any fixes can be made quickly. But again, it's funny. This week was always great for me because it felt like less of warning the carriers and more of warning the shippers, because there are good carriers that are going to get pulled over and inspected just on a whim. And so letting your shippers know, hey, if you're looking for something expedite or something to avoid all problems, and maybe put it on rail or avoid hitting the road in some type of way, or push it out a week ahead or push it out a week later. Because a lot of times I'd feel bad for carriers who get pulled over, go through the 37-step inspection, find nothing wrong, but still got the wag of the finger from the shipper at the end of the day.
I didn't know that it was a 37-point inspection.
That's,
seems like quite a process. It seems like that would take a long time. Like if you get pulled over,
hours.
Let's go through 37 things. Like do you then run out of hours of service? Because does that count against your hours of service?
I believe it does, and I've had I remember moving an expedite load around this, or an oversized load, and then it got really messed up because of it. So I think we ended up leaving the trailer at kind of like a rest stop and having to come pick it up the next day. So it takes hours. And that's a lot of times they have to explain to a shipper, listen, he's fine. He trusts that he's following the rules, but he's gonna be sitting there for 4 to 5 hours.
Sounds unpleasant, for sure. Want to move on. I mean, this is another topic that I think is important here for retailers is the possibility of just additional tariffs, not even a possibility, but additional tariffs on the pipeline. And so last week there were new tariffs signed in by President Biden, and a lot of these were focused on industries that maybe fall outside the scope of CPG and retail. However, if this is the area, the path we're headed towards is more protectionism, this is really important. So the ones that they were focused on last week, it was kind of these industries that the Biden administration deems special, things like Chinese vehicles, batteries, semiconductors, clean energy. I mean, things we don't want to fall behind on, I guess, and cost American jobs in the green areas. But also had steel and aluminum. Those are kind of those Rust Belt states. That could potentially be Biden supporters. I mean, I guess this could really ramp up if Trump is elected, which I guess some of the polls are showing that he's ahead in a lot of the swing states. So that's a real possibility. But Trump would go further and maybe have them on all imports. Maybe instead of having certain industries are special, no industry is special. They're all dumping on the U.S. And I think this is enough. It's enough of a concern. The National Retail Federation came out with a piece last week. Not surprisingly, they're against it. They said that we need to have a new free trade agreement, and also said that this would be, of course, inflationary to the end consumer. I mean, that would be my concern. It was that this just the consumer just ends up eating it. That we're still the products are still going to be manufactured overseas. It's just that they're going to be 20% more expensive. So it's just kind of it ends up hurting the average person instead of helping them. So that would be my concern. And then I think if you sort of take this and say, well, how could it impact CPG? I mean, in addition to just, I guess, taking money out of the pockets of consumers, they do source ingredients internationally, even if a lot of the CPGs are manufactured in the US, they're still taking ingredients from overseas. You think of palm oil that goes into your cookies and all of those things. Certainly coffee is imported. Some packaging material is imported. But any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it makes me feel like the last time that we had this situation with possibly Trump coming into it, not 100% sure what he was going to do. What was that, 2018, right? I always, it was 18 going into 19, but then the pandemic happened. Maybe it was 19 going into 20. But we still had that same issue with possible tariffs that he was looking to pursue. And so some of the same industries were the ones that I worked heavily in that, I mean, there was months on end where those shippers in particular were just like, we don't even know what we're shipping, where we're shipping it from. We're just kind of waiting to see how the choices from above are going to go. And it's interesting, too, because a lot of these aren't like, you're right, they're not like CPGs retail directly impacted. But, I mean, something like semiconductors in particular, I mean, depending on what you're purchasing, batteries, things like that, like that's going into a lot of the fun toys and things that people are purchasing these days. We had the huge PlayStation, I think 5, right, issues the last time that we had some semiconductor supply chain problems. So I think there are some ways we can see the effects from that. Not surprised at all by the NRF's thoughts on all of this too. I mean, this is, again, we sit here and we talk about what will demand look like for the second half of the year. This is another reason why I'm concerned exactly what we're going to see, because not only I think are these companies concerned with where the election will go and what that means for their sourcing, but even I think that's trickling down to the consumer as well. That thought of, okay, will we see inflation? How will some of these, if these tariffs are put in place, how will that end up hitting our pockets too? So I'm very interested in seeing for anyone, or maybe more interested in why people might see a huge uptick in demand near the end of the year when we have so many of these tough questions to still answer. But I think we'll, especially from those big areas, batteries, clean energy, like you said, solar components, we're going to see a little bit of maybe a standoff of purchasing and sticking really close to consumers to see where demand is, to make sure that inventory is just right.
Yeah, which seems like it's going to be really hard to do is the thing. I mean, we look at our freight data during the last period of of tariffs. I mean, there was a huge pull forward in imports to try to get ahead of those potential tariffs, and
Yeah.
which causes inventories to be bloated, and then you have the big drop off. So it causes all this volatility in order to avoid the tariffs, which make inventories difficult to manage. Inventories have already been sort of more difficult to manage ever since the pandemic. I mean, one of the Class 1 railroads told me that they used to sort of track kind of in line with the National Retail Federation, their expectations, but lately inventories have always been either too high or too low, and it's been just a huge component of the demand that's coming in through the ports. So definitely a big factor on imports, something we'll continue to watch. Want to hit on this next topic, which the extreme weather seems to be hitting a lot of industries. And you brought this to my attention, the flooding in the southern area of Brazil. So this is hitting the leather and footwear industries. You found this article in the Sourcing Journal. This is state as major cattle producer, leather processor, main center for footwear manufacturing, textile spinning and weaving, garment manufacturing. It says it also impacts food, machinery, and furniture. I did look up whether this would impact the coffee industry. Actually, seems like the coffee is more produced in more central Brazil. I mean, Brazil is the biggest manufacturer of coffee beans, or the cheaper coffee beans. So I don't think it's going to have a big impact there. And then separately, there was this story kind of on the same topic as the shortage of the ingredients that go into this popular sriracha brand, the Hoi Fong sriracha. I know all about that because my wife's family is Indonesian and they put it on absolutely everything. I already knew that in some places there were shortages, that it was going for 2 times to 4 times the regular price. I did not know that someone on eBay had put a 2-pack for $137. That's good luck with that. Then there's also a knockoff brand that has like almost nothing changed about it aside from the minimum to not get sued. But they halted production of this until after Labor Day, determining they didn't have enough supply of these hot peppers. They said there's no substitute. Either it makes it green or it doesn't taste the same. I guess the issue is drought in Mexico, and the weather needs to be relatively cool for Mexico, below 80 degrees. And it's kind of astounding because it's got to be such a cash cow for them, like just the steady stream of money coming in from something like that people just regularly, habitually buy, that they really, so it just shows how much weather can impact a certain company's, sort of supply chain, and you can't hedge away everything.
Yeah, and honestly, this is a story of karma, kind of, in a way, too. First off, I'll say go to Texas Pete, because Texas Pete is my favorite of all the hot sauces. So I'm going to throw that one out there first. But sriracha actually got itself in trouble back in 2016 when it went to undergo a number of disputes between Underwood Ranches, which might actually be the knockoff that you're talking about. So to kind of sum it up a little bit, just for time of the show, there was issues between I think it's Hugh Fong, right, that does sriracha, and Underwood. Hugh Fong was finding that they were maybe asking for too much money for the product. They were their main supplier here, their main supplier of peppers. They found out that they were using different machinery that actually made them operate a lot better. So they thought that the price should go down for what they were paying. Underwood thought that Hoi Fong, and they ended up winning, was really pushing too much of their relationship and asking for too much of the company. And so they ended up cutting them off. Underwood said, no, we're no longer selling to you. And they cut that off in 2016. And ever since then, they've had problems with finding a supplier who had the ability to meet their needs. And ever since then as well, we've seen, I think, 2 of these weather issues pop up. They've continued to have droughts with the backup supplier of peppers that they've had. So I believe at the end of the day, because of this dispute, because of Hoi Fong trying to really get their hands around the neck of their main pepper supplier, it ended up backfiring on them. They lost them, and ever since then have been just trying to fill that spot back up. And add Mother Nature's wrath into it, and they just haven't bounced back. So it is really an interesting story. We should probably spend an episode on it someday, but I don't think it's a problem they're going to get away from anytime soon.
Sriracha deep dive. That would be an interesting one. There's so many extreme weather events just impacting everything from the coffee to Brazil, the almond shortage in California to, there's other crops like the sugar price surge, the cocoa price surge, all these things that CPGs have to deal with because the weather's been so extreme.
Yeah, for sure. It's I like it now. It's warm. I'm happy. Hopefully, won't get too hot up here, and we'll still have apple season come fall.
Yeah.
Nice.
Already hot in Texas. That's for sure.
Well, it looks like we're out of time, so we'll get to Walmart, I think, next week. We'll do a nice deep dive into that, too, for our audience, so I'm sure it'll be something Mike touches on in our newsletter, so make sure you head to FreightWaves.com, click on newsletters at the top of the page, join the Stockout, and you'll also get a discount code in the first newsletter that you get for our event in June, so make sure you head to live.freightwaves.com to check out our Future of Supply Chain event. Until then, enjoy the week, and we will see you all next Monday.